He did not look at the man bleeding on the sidewalk. He looked at her. That was the first thing people who witnessed it noticed. Officer Damon Pruett pulled up to the corner of Harwell Avenue and 6th Street, stepped out of his cruiser, and his eyes went straight past the elderly black man lying on the concrete with a gash above his ear and went directly to the black woman kneeling beside him with her hands pressed against the wound. He looked at her the way you look at a problem, not at a person, not at someone doing the right thing. A problem. Before he even reached the curb, he had already decided what kind of story he was looking at. And the story he decided on was wrong. So completely, so catastrophically wrong that by the time anyone in Harwell County, Georgia understood the full cost of his decision, it was already too late to undo a single second of it. This is what happened on that corner. And this is what happened after. Harwell County sits in the northwestern corner of Georgia, about 40 miles outside of Atlanta. The kind of place that shows up in real estate listings as up and coming and in local newspapers as facing challenges. The county seat, a city called Garland, has a population of 31,000. It has a decent hospital, 2 high schools, a community college, and a sheriff's department with 20 deputies and 1 sheriff. A man named Gerald Sutton who had held the position for 9 years and whose primary qualification was that he had never lost an election. The Garland Police Department was separate from the Sheriff's Department and covered the city proper. It had 34 officers and a chief, named Roy Langley, who had been passed over for the sheriff's position. Wyson had never fully recovered from that fact. Langley ran a tight ship, which in practice meant he ran a department where complaints disappeared quietly and loyalty to the blue wall was treated as more important than loyalty to the badge's original purpose. Officer Damon Pruett had been with the Garland Police Department for 11 years. He was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and the particular kind of confidence that comes not from competence, but from never having been held accountable. He had 6 formal complaints on record: excessive force, unlawful search, intimidation, use of a racial slur during a domestic call. Every complaint had been reviewed internally. Every complaint had been dismissed. Chief Langley had signed off on each dismissal personally. Pruett drove the downtown beat, the stretch of Harwell Avenue where the older commercial buildings mixed with newer coffee shops. And the foot traffic was heavy enough on weekday afternoons that everyone could see you, but no one wanted to get involved. He knew that stretch well. He knew which corners had working cameras and which ones did not. He had developed, over 11 years, a set of assumptions about certain people in certain situations that he had never once been required to examine out loud. On a Wednesday afternoon in September, those assumptions walked him straight off a cliff. Dr. Celeste Washington was 44 years old and had been a physician for 17 years. She had done her residency at Emory, her fellowship at Johns Hopkins, and had spent the past 6 years as a senior medical officer with the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, traveling between regional facilities to conduct compliance reviews of veteran health programs. She was in Garland that afternoon because the VA's Regional Oversight Division had flagged the Harwell County Veterans Health Clinic for a pattern of delayed care complaints from Black and Latino veterans. She had a meeting the following morning with the clinic's administrative director. She had driven up from Atlanta that afternoon in her personal car, a 2015 Hyundai Sonata with a cracked rear bumper, wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt. And she was walking from her hotel on Chambers Street toward a restaurant 2 blocks away when she heard the sound. It was the sound of something heavy falling on concrete. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the specific, dull impact of a human body meeting the ground. She turned. An elderly man was down on the sidewalk at the corner of Harwell Avenue and 6th Street, sitting against the base of a brick building with his legs out in front of him and one hand raised to the side of his head. He was wearing a canvas work jacket, khaki pants, and the kind of cap old men wear at veterans' events. A canvas tote bag had spilled beside him. He was conscious but clearly disoriented, blinking slowly at the ground in front of him. Dr. Washington moved without thinking about it. 17 years of medicine does that. The thinking and the moving happen at the same time and neither one waits for the other. She reached him in 8 seconds. She knelt on the concrete beside him, identified herself as a doctor, and began assessing. Head wound above his left ear. The kind of laceration you get from a corner or an edge. Not deep enough to be immediately life-threatening, but producing more blood than it looked like because scalp wounds always do. Pupils unequal. He was 70-something, she guessed, with the weathered skin of a man who had spent a lot of his life outdoors. His pulse was strong, but his speech was slow. Possible concussion. Possible syncope. She needed to keep him still, and she needed someone to call 911. She looked up. A woman in her 30s was standing a few feet away holding a coffee cup, watching. "Call 911, please. Now. Tell them we have an elderly male, possible head trauma, corner of Harwell and 6th. The woman nodded and pulled out her phone. Dr. Washington turned back to her patient. She pressed the folded cloth of his own jacket sleeve against the wound to slow the bleeding. She kept talking to him. Asked him his name. He said it slowly. Walter Gaines. She asked if he had any medical conditions. He said his heart. She asked which medication. He told her. She filed it. She asked him to track her finger with his eyes and watch carefully when he did. She did not look up when the cruiser pulled to the curb. She was in the middle of something that mattered. "Sir, step back from him." Officer Damon Pruett's voice came from behind her left shoulder. She turned her head briefly. "I am a physician. This man has a head wound. I need you to confirm that 911 has been dispatched, and I need you to keep people back." I said step back. She turned back to Walter Gaines and adjusted the pressure on the wound. "I am not going to step back from a patient with active bleeding. Please confirm the ambulance." Pruett stepped around her to her right side. He was looking at her, not at the man on the ground. "Step away from him, right now." Dr. Washington looked up at him directly for the first time. "Officer, this man fell and struck his head. I am keeping direct pressure on a laceration and monitoring for concussion signs. I am a doctor. If you want to be helpful, please clear some space and confirm medical response is en route." She looked back at Walter Gaines. "What I need you not to do is interrupt this." The sound Pruett made was not quite a laugh. It was shorter than that. Dismissive in a way that required no words. "You a doctor," he said. In that, he was looking at her sweatshirt, at her jeans, at the crack in the rear bumper of the Sonata parked half a block away that he had clocked when he pulled up. "I am a doctor," she said evenly. "My credentials are in my bag if you need to see them. Right now I need to stay focused on this patient." She pressed her other hand gently to Walter Gaines's shoulder to keep him from trying to get up. "Stay still for me, sir." "Stay still." Pruett crouched down, not to look at Walter Gaines, to get closer to her face. "What's your relationship to this individual?" "I do not know him. I saw him fall," I responded. "That is what you do when you see someone fall. You just happened to be here. I was walking to dinner." She did not look at Pruett. She was watching Walter Gaines's pupils. "I am not going to keep explaining myself to you while this man needs attention. Please step back and let me work." Pruett stood. There was a silence of about 3 seconds. The woman who had called 911 was still standing nearby, watching. 2 other pedestrians had stopped further back on the sidewalk. A man in a delivery uniform had paused on the opposite side of the street. "I'm going to need you to come with me," Pruett said. Dr. Washington pressed her lips together for one moment. "I am not leaving this patient until the ambulance arrives. That is my medical obligation, and I am not going to violate it." That was when Pruett reached down and grabbed her left arm. He did not grab it gently. He grabbed it the way you grab something you intend to move. He pulled her upright and away from Walter Gaines in one motion. Dr. Washington made a sound, sharp and involuntary. The sound a person makes when something unexpected happens to their body. Walter Gaines said no, loudly, and tried to reach for her. And a small amount of blood ran freely down his temple because the pressure had been released. "Stop." Dr. Washington's voice was controlled, but it had changed register. She was not calm now. She was precise. The way a person gets precise when they are operating inside a situation that is moving too fast. "You are interfering with emergency medical care. This man is actively bleeding. You need to let me return to him right now." Pruett did not let go of her arm. "You're coming with me." He walked her 3 steps toward his cruiser. And this is what people who watched it afterward said they remembered most. Not the shouting. Not the handcuffs. What they remembered was that Dr. Celeste Washington turned her head, just once, back toward Walter Gaines, sitting alone against the brick building with blood on his face. And the expression she had was not fear. It was not anger. It was the expression of someone who has just been forced to leave a job and finished and cannot stand that fact. She was still watching him when the handcuffs went on. The charge Pruett wrote in his incident report was obstruction of a police officer and interference with an emergency response. He wrote that the suspect had refused repeated lawful orders, had made physical contact with the officer during detainment, and had given inconsistent accounts of her relationship to the victim. He wrote it efficiently and without hesitation in the way that a person writes something they have written variations of before. Walter Gaines was transported by ambulance to Harwell County Medical Center, where he was treated for a moderate concussion and the laceration requiring for sutures. He was kept overnight for observation. When the ER physician asked him what had happened, he said a woman had stopped to help him. He said she was a doctor. He said she had been doing everything right when the officer took her away. He asked 3 times over the course of the evening whether she was all right. Nobody had an answer for him yet. At the Garland police station, Dr. Washington was processed through booking with the particular efficiency of a department that had done this many times. She was photographed, fingerprinted, her personal belongings sealed in a clear bag. Her wallet, her phone, her hotel keycard, and the VA identification wallet that Pruett had not looked at when he took it from her jacket pocket, that he had dropped into the bag without opening, that now sat in a sealed plastic evidence envelope on the booking counter while he sat at his desk filling out paperwork. She was placed in a holding room at 4:52 in the afternoon. It was a small room with a metal bench and a fluorescent light that buzzed at a frequency that seemed specifically designed to make thinking harder. She sat down. She put her hands on her knees. She breathed. She thought about Walter Gaines. She thought about his unequal pupils and hoped the paramedics had documented that, unhoped the ER team had ordered a CT scan, and hoped whoever had taken over her notes on his medications had actually listened. She thought about the 4 sutures she would have done differently. She thought about the blood that had run down his face when Pruett pulled her away. She thought about the identification wallet in the plastic bag outside this room. She thought about the phone in that same bag, and the mischeck minus in that would have triggered her department's field officer protocol at 4:30, and the call that would have gone to her supervisor at the VA's regional oversight office at 4:45. She looked at the crack under the door. She listened. She had been in harder situations than a holding room in Garland, Georgia. She had been in a forward operating base clinic in Kandahar with 2 doctors and 12 patients and equipment that was 3 years past its service date. She had been in a federal hearing room in Birmingham, where the other side had for lawyers and a senator. She had learned, in those places and in the years between them, that the most productive thing you can do when someone puts you somewhere you should not be is stop thinking about where you are and start thinking about what you know. She knew the identification wallet was in that bag. She knew someone would open it eventually. She waited. The booking officer at the Garland Police Department that evening was a woman named Sharon Dupree, who had worked the desk for 12 years and had the particular competence of someone who has seen enough to be unsurprised by most things. At 6:17 in the evening, she opened the property bag from Pruett's arrest to complete the evidence log, and she picked up the identification wallet because she needed to record its contents. She opened it. She looked at the badge, the gold seal of the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. She looked at the photo ID. She looked at the title below the name: Senior Medical Officer, Office of Inspector General, United States Department of Veterans Affairs. She looked at the secondary document behind the ID card, a letter on Department of Justice letterhead authorizing investigative status for an active federal compliance review in Harwell County, Georgia. Sharon Dupree set the wallet down carefully on the counter in front of her. She sat with it for a moment. Then she picked up the phone and called Chief Roy Langley's cell. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Chief," she said, "I need you to come down to booking. We have a situation." Langley arrived in 14 minutes. He looked at the identification wallet. He looked at the letter on DOJ letterhead. He read the name. He read the title. He read the words Active Federal Compliance Review in Harwell County, Georgia. He set it down on the counter and stood very still for a moment. Then he said, "Where is Pruett?" Sharon pointed toward the bullpen. Langley walked to the bullpen doorway and said, "Damon, my office, now." Pruett looked up from his desk with the expression of a man who has not yet understood that the ground has shifted under him. He pushed back his chair and followed. The conversation that happened behind Langley's closed door lasted 9 minutes. Pruett's voice was audible through the door 3 times, each time louder than the last. The third time someone in the bullpen looked up from their work. Langley's voice was not audible at all, which meant he was keeping it very quiet, which the officers who had worked with him long enough knew was not a good sign. When the door opened, Pruett came out first. His face was a color it had not been when he went in. He walked to his desk, sat down, and did not speak. Langley came out second. He picked up the identification wallet from the booking counter without looking at Sharon Dupree. He walked back down the hallway toward the holding room. He knocked twice and opened the door. Dr. Washington looked up from the metal bench. Langley held out the identification wallet. She took it. She opened it, checked the contents, and put it in her jacket pocket. She stood up. Langley said, "I owe you an apology." His voice was the voice of a man who understood the specific shape of the problem he was now inside. She looked at him for a moment. "Mr. Gaines," she said. "Walter Gaines. He was transported to Harwell County Medical. I need someone to confirm his current status and confirm the attending physician has his medication list." Langley nodded. "I will take care of that personally." "Thank you." She picked up her bag. She walked out of the holding room and down the hallway toward the booking counter. She accepted her phone, her wallet, her keycard. She turned on her phone. She had 4 missed calls. 2 from her supervisor at the VA regional office. 1 from a number she recognized as the Department of Justice field liaison. 1 from a number she did not recognize that had left a voicemail. She listened to in the hallway. She listened to it twice. Then she sat down on the plastic chair near the station entrance. She did not leave. Pruett was at his desk watching her from across the room. He watched her sit down and, not leaving, he felt the first real movement of something cold in his chest. He had felt something like this once before, years ago, when he had filed a report and found out later there was a camera he had not accounted for. It was the feeling of a story shifting, of the version you were counting on becoming unreliable. He stood up and walked to Langley's office. "Chief," he said quietly, "what exactly does a VA Inspector General officer do?" Langley looked at him. He sat back in his chair. "The VA Inspector General investigates fraud, waste, abuse, and civil rights violations at VA facilities." He paused. "She was here because someone flagged the Harwell County VA clinic for discriminatory care." He paused again. "She was the investigator they sent. You arrested the investigator they sent, Damon, while she was rendering emergency medical care to a veteran on a public sidewalk." Pruett stood in the doorway and said nothing. "The complaint she is about to file," Langley continued, "will go to the Department of Justice, the VA Office of Inspector General, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Civil Rights Division of the FBI." He looked at Pruett steadily. "And she has the legal standing to make every single one of those referrals count." Pruett said, "I was following procedure." Langley said, "I know you were." He looked back at his desk. "That is the problem, Damon. You have been following the same procedure for 11 years. And for 11 years I have been signing off on it." He was quiet for a moment. "That ends tonight." At 8:44 in the evening, a government vehicle with federal plates parked in front of the Garland Police Department. The woman who stepped out wore a dark jacket and carried a document folio and walked with the particular unhurried confidence of someone who has done this before. Her name was Dr. Banks. She was the Deputy Regional Director of the VA Office of Inspector General, and she was Drive Washington's direct supervisor. She had driven from Atlanta without stopping. She did not raise her voice when she came in. She introduced herself to Sharon Dupree, asked to speak with Chief Langley, sat down with him and to representatives from the DOJ Civil Rights Field Office for 40 minutes. And at the end of those 40 minutes, there was a document on Langley's desk that had not been there before. Then she walked to the plastic chair near the entrance where Drive Washington was sitting. Dr. Washington looked up. "Are you all right?" Banks asked. "I am fine." Dr. Washington's voice was even. "Walter Gaines, room 214, Harwell County Medical." Moderate concussion, for sutures, stable. I confirmed it 20 minutes ago. Banks sat down beside her. I know. She paused. She looked at the document folio in her lap. This is not the first time something like this has happened in this department. I know, Dr. Washington said. That is why I was here. They sat together for a moment in the particular quiet of a police station late on a weekday evening. Then Banks said, "The formal complaint has been filed. DOJ Civil Rights is opening a review. It is going to be a long few months." Dr. Washington nodded. She looked across the room to where Pruett was sitting at his desk. He was not looking at her. He was looking at his phone. His knee was bouncing under the desk at a rhythm that had nothing to do with patience. She thought about Walter Gaines, about the blood on his face when she had been pulled away, about the 4 sutures she had not been there to do, about the 11 other people whose complaints against this department had been dismissed, one at a time, over the past 5 years. She thought about the VA clinic 3 miles from this station where veterans were waiting longer for care than the law allowed and where some of them had been told there was nothing available when the record showed otherwise. She thought about what she had come here to do. She was still going to do it. The formal investigation opened on Monday. Federal investigators arrived at the Garland Police Department with a list of documents under jurisdiction that no one in the building had the authority to question. They pulled Pruett's complete complaint history, 6 complaints, 11 years, 0 sustained findings. They pulled the body camera logs and found that in 9 separate incidents over the past 3 years, Pruett's camera had been reported as malfunctioning at the point of physical contact with the subject 9 times. That is not a malfunction. That is a pattern. They interviewed 11 people who had previously filed complaints against Pruett. The accounts were consistent in the specific way that true accounts are consistent. Not identical, not rehearsed, but built from the same architecture, the same language, the same sequence. He didn't ask questions. He decided before he got out of the car. He looked at me undecided. When you told him something he didn't want to hear, he didn't listen. He escalated. A retired postal worker named James Aldridge, who had filed a complaint 3 years earlier, said something that the investigators wrote down verbatim. He treated me like I was the problem, not what was happening. Me. My presence was the problem to him. They interviewed Sharon Dupree. They interviewed 2 officers from the bullpen who had heard the conversation through Langley's door. They obtained the phone records from the evening of the incident and confirmed a timeline of calls. They obtained the sidewalk surveillance footage from the parking garage across the street from the corner of Harwell Avenue and 6th Street. Footage that Pruett had not known existed, that showed in clear and continuous detail everything that happened from the moment drive. Washington knelt beside Walter Gaines to the moment the handcuffs went on. The footage ran for minutes and 11 seconds. In those 4 minutes and 11 seconds, Dr. Washington did not obstruct anything. She did not interfere with anything. She performed emergency medical care on an injured elderly man with the efficiency and composure of someone who had done this before, while clearly and repeatedly identifying herself as a physician, while clearly and repeatedly asking the responding officer to assist rather than impede. While Walter Gaines's blood ran down the side of his face because the officer had pulled away the person who was stopping it. Chief Foy Langley placed Pruett on administrative leave on day for the investigation. He did not make a public statement at that point. He was advised not to. He sat in his office for most of that day with the door closed. On day 9, Langley submitted his own resignation. He left a letter with the city administrator that was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph notified the city of his resignation effective immediately. The second paragraph stated that he accepted full responsibility for the supervisory failures that had allowed Officer Pruett's conduct to continue without consequence for 11 years. The third paragraph said he was sorry, not to the city, to the people whose complaints he had dismissed. Nobody had asked him to write that third paragraph. He wrote it anyway. The federal indictment of Damon Pruett was filed on a Thursday. 4 counts. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Obstruction of a federal investigation. Interference with emergency medical care. Civil rights violations under the pattern or practice statute. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. Bond was set at $35,000. Pruett made bail. He went home. He sat in his house for the first few days watching the news coverage, with the sound often told himself there had been a misunderstanding, that any reasonable person looking at the situation would have done what he did, that she had not complied, that he had followed procedure. He told himself these things the way you tell yourself something you need to be true, even when some part of you already knows it is not. The trial was held at the federal courthouse in Atlanta. 7 days. The prosecution played the parking garage footage, all for minutes and 11 seconds of it, without commentary, without narration. Just the footage running on the screen in the courtroom in complete silence, while the jury watched a woman in a gray sweatshirt keep her hands pressed against a wound, keep her voice level, and keep asking for cooperation, while a uniformed officer decided that her presence was the problem. They called Walter Gaines to the stand. He was 73 years old, a Vietnam veteran, and he walked to the witness box with a cane and sat down and answered every question in the careful, measured way of a man who has thought about what he wants to say and has decided to say exactly that and nothing more. He said that Dr. Washington had saved him from lying alone on a sidewalk, bleeding, until the ambulance arrived. He said she had told him what she was doing and why at every step. He said she had been common professional. He said that when the officer took her away, he had tried to stand up and follow because it was wrong and he knew it was wrong, but he could not get up fast enough. He said he had thought about that moment every day since. He looked at Pruett when he said it. Pruett did not look back. They called James Aldridge, the retired postal worker. They called a woman named Denise Humphrey, who had filed a complaint in 2021 after Pruett had pulled her over on Garland Boulevard and searched her vehicle without consent and told her, when she asked why, that he knew a drug car when he saw one. Her car had been clean. Her complaint had been dismissed in 6 days. She sat in the witness box in a dark dress and spoke without notes, and when she was finished speaking, 2 jurors were writing very fast. Dr. Washington took the stand on the 5th day. She described the incident in the specific, factual, sequenced way that physicians describe things. She did not editorialize. She did not raise her voice. She stated what she had observed, what she had done, what had been said, and what had happened. When the prosecutor asked her what she had thought when the handcuffs went on, she paused for exactly 3 seconds. She said, "I thought about Walter Gaines's blood pressure and whether the paramedics would ask the right questions." The jury deliberated for 5 hours and 23 minutes. Guilty on all 4 counts. Damon Pruett stood when the verdict was read and his face was very still. The kind of still that happens when a person has been holding something together for a long time and the thing they were holding it together for is now gone. Judge Marcus Webb, 22 years on the federal bench, looked at him for a moment before speaking. "Officer Pruett, you spent 11 years on a public street in a uniform that represented a promise. The promise was simple: to serve, to protect, to treat every person you encountered as a person deserving of dignity and assistance. You saw a woman performing emergency medical care on a bleeding elderly man and you looked at her and decided she was a problem to be managed. You did not see a physician. You did not see a good Samaritan. You did not see a human being doing the right thing. You saw a black woman in a sweatshirt crouching over an old man and you decided you already knew the story. You were wrong. And 11 years of other people being wrong about who deserved protection ended in this courtroom today." He sentenced Pruett to 4 years and 8 months in federal prison. The marshals came. The handcuffs went on. Pruett walked through the side door of the courtroom and the door closed and the room let out a long, collective breath. Dr. Washington was seated in the second row behind the prosecution table. She had her hands folded in her lap and her credential wallet in her jacket pocket. She watched the door close. She did not smile. She did not cry. She sat with it for a moment. The way you sit with something that is finished but not resolved, that is over but not done. Walter Gaines was in the row beside her. He had come down from Garland on the bus that morning. When the verdict was read, he had reached over and taken her hand without saying anything. She had let him. They sat together in the emptying courtroom for a few minutes after the room cleared, an old veteran and a federal doctor. connected by 4 minutes and 11 seconds on a sidewalk, and everything that those 4 minutes had cost. In the months that followed, the Garland Police Department underwent a federal consent decree that ran to 37 pages. It mandated body camera policies with immediate termination for tampering. It established an independent civilian review board with the authority to subpoena department records. It required documented justification for every vehicle stop and every request for identification. It mandated new training on medical emergency protocols, specifically that officers arriving at the scene of a medical emergency are required to support and not obstruct civilian medical assistance until professional medical response arrive. That last requirement came directly from what had happened on the corner of Harwell Avenue and 6th Street. It was called, in the formal language of the consent decree, the Good Samaritan Protocol. A new police chief was appointed, a woman named Cheryl Maddox, who had spent 18 years with the Atlanta Police Department and had a reputation for two things. She kept her word and she did not look the other way. One of her first decisions was to reach out personally to each of the 11 people whose complaints against Pruett had been dismissed. She did not offer them legal remedies or financial settlements. She called each one and told them that their complaint had been real, that it had been documented, and that she was sorry it had not been taken seriously when it should have been. Several of them cried. One of them, James Aldridge, said he had waited 3 years to hear someone in authority say those words. He said he had almost stopped believing it would happen. Dr. Washington completed her compliance review of the Harwell County Veterans Health Clinic. The review found systematic delays in care affecting a disproportionate number of Black and Latino veterans, documentation irregularities in 42 case files, and staffing allocation practices that did not meet federal standards. The clinic's director was placed on administrative leave and the clinic entered a active action program under VA oversight. 42 veterans had their cases reopened and reviewed. Each one received a personal call from a case coordinator. Walter Gaines was one of those 42. Damon Pruett reported to the Federal Correctional Facility in Jessup, Georgia on a Tuesday morning in November. He was assigned a bunk and given the specific, material reality of a life reduced to what a room the size of a parking space can contain. He spent the first weeks very quiet. He thought about the footage. He had watched it in the courtroom for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and he had watched it the way you watch something you are hoping will look different from what you remember. It did not look different. It looked exactly like what it was. A woman with her hands pressed against a wound, her voice level, her attention on the patient, asking for help. And him deciding before he ever reached the curb, before he ever heard her voice, before he ever looked at the man on the ground, that she was the problem. He thought about that a lot in the early months. Not about the arrest, not about the trial. About that moment. The moment before any of it happened. The moment when he pulled up to the curb and looked past the bleeding man and looked straight at her and made a decision in about 3 seconds that took 11 years to fully understand. He had believed for 11 years that his instincts were reliable, that what he saw when he looked at a situation was the truth of the situation. That experience gave you that a uniform gave you that. He had never once, in 11 years, considered the possibility that what experience had actually given him was a set of assumptions he had built so deep he could not see them anymore. A woman in a sweatshirt kneeling beside a bleeding man. That was what was on the corner of Harwell Avenue and 6th Street. He had looked at it and seen something else entirely. And in a federal correctional facility in Jessup, Georgia, with nothing but time and silence and the ceiling to look at, Damon Pruett finally let himself stay with that question long enough to feel how much it cost. Not himself, the others. Every one of the 11 people whose complaints he had dismissed from his mind as procedure. Every person who had stood on a sidewalk or sat in a patrol car or waited in a booking room and told the truth and been told, by the whole machinery of his system, that their truth did not count. Every Walter Gaines who had ever bled while someone who could help was being pulled away. He lay on his bunk in the gray early light and thought about James Aldridge's words on the stand. He decided before he got out of the car. He looked at me undecided. There was no version of that sentence that put him on the right side of it. It was too late to undo any of it. But somewhere inside a 4-year and 8-month sentence, in the specific quiet way that reckoning comes to people when there is nowhere left to run from it. Damon Pruett finally understood what he had actually been doing all those years. He had not been protecting anyone. He had been deciding who deserved to be protected. And he had been deciding based on something that had nothing to do with protection. That understanding did not feel like relief. It felt like the exact weight of the thing it was. And for the first time in 11 years, he did not try to put it down. Dr. Celeste Washington still works for the Department of Veterans Affairs. She travels between facilities, reviews compliance records, takes calls at hours that are inconvenient, and does the specific, unglamorous work of making sure systems designed to help people actually help people. She is good at her job in the way that people are good at jobs they have chosen because they believe the work matters. She visited Walter Gaines twice after the trial, once in the winter and once in the spring. They had coffee and he told her about Vietnam and she told him about Kandahar and they sat in his kitchen in Garland. Georgian talked the way people talk when they have been through something together that most people around them will never fully understand. She asked him once, during the second visit, whether he had known when it was happening. When Pruett was pulling her away, whether he had understood what was happening. Walter Gaines looked at his coffee cup for a moment. "I knew," he said. "I knew from the second he pulled up. He looked right past me. He looked at you, and I knew." He paused. "That is why I tried to get up." She nodded. She had known too. Not about Pruett specifically, not about that particular afternoon, but she had known in the general, accumulated way that black women in America know certain things. That some people will look at you and see a problem before they see a person. That the sweatshirt and the cracked bumper and the kneeling on concrete will always, for some people, tell a story that is easier to believe than the one that is actually in front of them. The difference between that afternoon and every other afternoon was a parking garage with a working camera. For minutes and 11 seconds of footage. And the fact that her identification wallet was in her jacket pocket. She thought about the people who did not have the footage, who did not have the wallet, who had only the truth, and the truth was not enough. She still thinks about them. Every day she shows up to work, she thinks about them. That is, more than anything else, why she keeps showing up. If this story reminded you that doing the right thing sometimes costs everything, and that the people protecting the system are sometimes the ones the system refuses to protect, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, because accountability does not happen by accident. It happens because someone, somewhere, refuses to look away. Thank you for watching.